She thought humiliating me in front of 40 people would make me disappear. Instead, it made me stand up with an envelope my grandmother sealed 5 years ago. An envelope my mother never knew existed. When I finally opened the last packet inside, she didn't just lose the room, she lost her entire story. Because the adoption she bragged about, it wasn't just cruel, it was a lie with a paper trail. My name is Ella Foster, and I am currently standing in the center of a kill box disguised as a private dining room. They call this place the Marigold Room. It sits 30 stories above the Philadelphia skyline, a glass-walled aquarium of old money, scented with white hydrangeas and expensive gilt. From where I stand, the city looks like a spilled jewelry box, glittering and distant, totally indifferent to the fact that my life is being dismantled between the salad course and the entree. There are 40 guests here. I counted them while the waiters poured the vintage Cabernet. 40 people who are supposedly here to celebrate the fact that I have survived on this earth for 30 years. But looking at their faces, the frozen smiles, the darting eyes, the way they are gripping their crystal stemware a little too tightly, it is obvious they are not here for a celebration. They are here for a spectacle. And my mother, Diane Foster, is delivering the performance of her life. She stands at the head of the U-shaped table, gripping the microphone like she is hosting the Academy Awards. The lighting in here is low, designed to flatter the wealthy and aging, but the spotlight hits Diane perfectly. It catches the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, the frantic shimmer of her sequins, and the terrifying, manic brightness in her eyes. She is smiling so hard her jaw muscles are twitching. It is the smile of a predator who has finally cornered its prey in a room with no exits. "Can everyone hear me?" Diane asks, her voice amplified by the room's speakers, bouncing off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I just want to make sure the people in the back can hear the truth. We are all about truth tonight, aren't we?" A few people chuckle politely. It is the sound of social obligation. They do not know what is coming. Or maybe they do. Maybe that is why the room feels so cold. I am seated in a chair wrapped in a massive, ridiculous gold ribbon, like I am a prize at a charity raffle. My hands are folded in my lap, under the table. My fingers are wrapped around a cream-colored envelope inside my clutch. The paper is heavy, textured linen stock. I can feel the raised wax seal through the thin leather of my bag. It presses against my palm, hard and unforgiving. The seal bears the initials M.F., Margaret Foster, my grandmother. Diane takes a sip of her champagne, letting the silence stretch. She loves the silence. She treats it like a canvas. "You know," Diane says, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she uses when she is about to destroy someone's reputation over brunch. 30 years. It is a long time. A lot of you look at Ella and you see a Foster. You see the private schools, the tennis lessons, the job at that fancy architecture firm. She pauses, gesturing to me with a limp hand. But Paul and I, we have always known the reality. We have always known that charity starts at home. My stomach turns over. It is a physical sensation, like the elevator drop when the cables snap. I look at my father, Paul. He is sitting 2 seats away from Diane. He is staring intently at the condensation on his water glass. He has not looked at me once since we arrived. He is frozen, a statue of a man who learned decades ago that the only way to survive Diane is to play dead. "We never really talk about the beginning," Diane continues, her voice brightening, becoming brittle and sharp. "Do we, Paul? How we decided to expand our family." Paul does not move. He does not blink. Diane laughs, a tinkling, artificial sound. "Oh, stop being so modest, darling. We can tell them. We are all friends here." She turns back to the room, beaming. "You see? Everyone congratulates us on being such generous parents, but I have to be honest, it wasn't just about love, it was about strategy." She waits for the punchline. She has rehearsed this. I know she has. I can see the timing in her shoulders. "We adopted Ella for the tax benefits," she says. The room goes quiet. Not the respectful quiet of a toast, but the sucked air vacuum of shock. Diane does not stop. She leans into the microphone, her grin widening. It is true. We needed a write-off that year. The accountant said we needed to diversify our assets, and well, we acquired a dependent instead. She laughs again, louder this time, expecting the room to join in. I always call her my little write-off. The best deduction we ever made. My heart is hammering against my ribs. A trapped bird. I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. The humiliation is hot and prickly. Crawling up my neck, I look around the room. A few people are laughing the sycophants, the ones who depend on Diane's social approval to exist. But most of the guests are staring at their plates or exchanging horrified glances. They know this is wrong. They know this is cruel. But nobody says a word. Nobody moves, except Sloane. My sister Sloane is sitting across from me. She is 26, beautiful in the way that requires 3 hours of professional grooming. And she is holding her phone up, the lenses pointed directly at my face. She is not hiding it. She has the flash on, a blinding white star in the dim room, and she is laughing. It is a genuine laugh, cruel and delighting in the carnage. She is recording this. She is capturing the exact moment her older sister is reduced to a line item on a tax return. I can see the reflection of the room in her eyes. She is already thinking about the caption. She is already thinking about the engagement metrics. Look at her face. Sloane giggles, loud enough to be picked up by the microphone. Mom, look at her face. She looks like she's going to cry. Oh, don't be sensitive, Ella, Diane chides, waving her glass at me. It is just a joke. We love you, even if you were a financial decision. I look down at my plate. The filet mignon is swimming in a dark reduction sauce that suddenly looks like oil. I take a breath. 1 breath. 2 breaths. I promised myself I would not do this. I promised myself I would not engage. I thought I could just survive the dinner, take the insults, and leave. I thought I could be the bigger person. But then I feel the envelope again. It is sitting in my clutch, heavy as a brick. Inside that cream envelope is a smaller packet, a packet my grandmother, Maggie, sealed 5 years ago. A packet she made me promise never to open unless I had no other choice. A packet that the lawyer, Elliot Barnes, handed to me with a look of grave warning. Prepare for what they will try when they realize you cannot be controlled, he had said. I realize, with a sudden crystal clarity, that the time for control is over. Diane did not just cross a line, she erased it. She invited 40 people here to watch me bleed. She thinks I am unarmed. She thinks I am the same scared little girl who used to apologize for taking up space in her house. It is funny, isn't it? Diane is saying now, riffing on the bit, unable to let it go. How some investments mature, and some just depreciate. A hand touches my arm. It is slight, bony, and cold. I turn to my left. Aunt Nora is sitting there. My father's sister. She is the black sheep of the Foster family, mostly because she refuses to dye her gray hair and refuses to listen to Diane. She is wearing a tuxedo jacket and drinking whiskey neat. She is looking at Diane with a mixture of boredom and disgust. Then she leans in close to my ear. Her voice is a rasp of smoke and steel. If she does it, Nora whispers, so low only I can hear. You finish it. I look at Nora. She nods at my clutch. She knows, somehow. She knows. The fear evaporates. It is strange how quickly it vanishes. 1 second, I am terrified, shrinking in my chair, wishing the floor would open up and swallow me whole. The next second, the fear is replaced by something else. Something cold. Something sharp. Something that feels like the steel of a blade. I am not crying. I am not shaking. I am calculating. I reach into my clutch. My fingers brush the wax seal. It feels like a trigger. I pull the envelope out. I do not hide it. I place it on the white tablecloth, right next to my wineglass. The cream paper stands out against the white linen. The red wax seal looks like a drop of blood. I push my chair back. The sound of the wood scraping against the parquet floor is loud, harsh. It cuts through Diane's laughter. Diane stops. She blinks, the microphone lowering slightly. Ella, where are you going? We haven't cut the cake. I ordered the one you like. The cheap one. She smiles at the crowd, expecting another laugh. She does not get one. I stand up. I'm wearing a dress I bought yesterday. Silk, emerald green, backless. It cost $2,000. I paid for it with my own money. I did not buy it for them. I bought it for this moment, though I did not know it at the time. I feel tall. I feel like a statue made of ice. I look at Sloane. She is still filming, but her smile is faltering. She zooms in, waiting for the tears. She wants the breakdown. She wants the content. I look at Paul. He finally looks up. His eyes are wide, terrified. He sees the envelope on the table. He recognizes the seal. The color drains from his face so fast he looks like he is going into shock. He opens his mouth to say something, to stop me, but no sound comes out. Finally, I look at Diane. She looks confused. She is not used to me standing up. She is used to me sitting down, taking it, shrinking. She is waiting for me to run out of the room. She has banked her entire evening on the certainty that I will run. I pick up the envelope. I hold it in my hand, feeling the weight of the last 5 years, the weight of every lie, every insult, every time she made me feel like a guest in my own life. I walk toward her. The room is dead silent now. The waiters have stopped moving. The candles flicker in the stillness. The only sound is the click of my heels on the floor. Click, click, click. I stop 3 feet away from her. I'm close enough to smell her perfume, Chanel and hairspray. I am close enough to see the cracks in her foundation. I am close enough to see the sudden flicker of doubt in her eyes. You wanted to make a speech. Mother, I ask. My voice is not loud, but in the silence, it carries to every corner of the room. Diane laughs nervously. She tries to bring the microphone back up. Oh, sit down. Ella, don't be dramatic. It is a party. No, I say. It is not a party. It is a roast, and you are the comedian. I hold up the envelope. Diane's eyes drop to it. She sees the seal. She freezes. Her smile slides off her face like wet paint. You invited 40 people here to tell them the truth, I say, my voice steady, calm, terrifyingly reasonable. You wanted to talk about taxes. You wanted to talk about write-offs. You wanted to talk about how I was acquired. I take a step closer. She takes a step back. She hits the edge of the table. You wanted truth on a microphone, I ask, and I see the panic flare in her eyes. She knows she has lost control. She just does not know how badly yet. I rip the top of the envelope open. The sound of tearing paper is louder than a gunshot. Then let's do truth, I say, pulling out the documents. Properly. The silence of an architecture firm at 8 in the evening is a specific kind of heavy. It is not peaceful. It is the pressurized quiet of deadlines and fluorescent humming. I was the last one left at Northline Urban Studio. Sitting in a pool of blue light from my dual monitors, staring at a rendering for a mixed-use complex in Fishtown that I had been tweaking for 3 hours. The client wanted the facade to feel organic. My boss wanted it to be under budget. I was just trying to make sure the load-bearing columns did not look like mistakes. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the grit of a 14-hour day under my eyelids. This was my life. Safe, predictable, built on structural integrity and the reliable physics of steel and glass. I liked buildings because they did not lie to you. If a foundation was weak, it cracked. It did not pretend to be strong while secretly plotting your collapse. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk, a jarring buzz that made me jump. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number with a local area code. Usually, I would let it go to voicemail. I assumed it was a telemarketer or a political campaign, the kind of digital noise I had become expert at filtering out. But something about the persistence of the ring, the way it seemed to demand attention in the empty office, made me pause. I picked it up. "This is Ella," I said, my voice scratching slightly from disuse. "Ms. Ella Foster. The voice on the other end was male, deep, and clipped. It sounded like expensive suits and billable hours. Speaking. My name is Elliot Barnes. I am an attorney with Barnes, Caldwell, and Lewis. I am calling regarding the estate of Margaret Foster. My hand froze over my mouse. My grandmother. Yes. My grandmother died 6 months ago, I said, the words tasting like ash. Maggie. The only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw a person, not an obligation. Her funeral had been a stiff, formal affair where Diane cried loudly for the cameras, and Paul stood by the grave like he was waiting for a bus. The estate was settled in January. My father inherited the house. Everything else was liquidated. That is the common understanding. Yes, Barnes said. His tone did not fluctuate. However, that understanding is incomplete. I sat up straighter, the ergonomic mesh of my chair creaking. I do not understand. If you are calling about a bill or a claim, I am not calling about a debt, Ms. Foster. I am calling about a bequest. There was a pause, heavy and deliberate. Your grandmother left a specific set of documents. They were held in a blind trust, to be released only after a specific duration of time had passed since her death. That duration expires tomorrow. Documents, I repeated. What kind of documents? I cannot discuss the contents over the phone, but she was very explicit. These are for your eyes only, not your father's. Certainly not your mother's. The way he said certainly not your mother's sent a chill down my spine. It was not unprofessional, but it was pointed. It suggested he knew exactly who Diane Foster was. I can come to your office next week, I said, reaching for my calendar. No, Barnes cut in. You need to come tomorrow, first thing, 8 in the morning. And Ms. Foster. Yes. Do not tell your family. Do not mention my name. Do not mention that Maggie left anything behind. If you do, the terms of the trust become void. I stared at the rendering on my screen, the happy little digital people walking through a fake plaza. Oblivious to the fact that their world was just pixels. Why, I asked. Why the secrecy? Because Margaret knew her family, Barnes said, and she wanted to make sure you had a head start. He hung up. I sat there for a long time, holding the dead phone. The office hummed around me, but the air felt different now, thinner, sharper. Maggie. I thought about the last time I saw her, a week before the stroke that took her. She had been frail, sitting in her sunroom at the Main Line estate, wrapped in a wool blanket. She had grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her blue eyes cloudy but fierce. Don't let them eat you. Ella, she had whispered, you are made of better stuff. I thought it was just the medication talking. I thought she was just confused. Now, I was not so sure. I packed up my bag, my movements mechanical. I turned off the monitors, plunging the room into darkness. I took the elevator down to the lobby, nodded to the night security guard, and walked out into the cool Philadelphia air. I drove home to my apartment in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of tires on asphalt and the replay of Barnes's voice in my head. A head start. A head start on what I unlocked my apartment door, a modest one-bedroom in a walk-up that Diane called quaint and Sloane called sad. I dropped my keys in the bowl and kicked off my heels. I was halfway to the kitchen to pour a glass of wine when my phone buzzed again, and then 3 times in rapid succession. I pulled it out. It was the Foster family group chat, a digital space I mostly kept muted, checking it only to ensure no one had died. Diane. Big news, everyone. Clear your calendars for the 26th. Sloane OMG. What is it? Did Dad finally buy the boat? Diane. Better? We are throwing a party. I frowned. The 26th was a month away. Diane. We are hosting a 30th birthday dinner for Ella. My thumbs hovered over the screen. I stared at the message, trying to make the letters rearrange themselves into something that made sense. A party for me. My birthdays were historically non-events. My 16th was a pizza delivery because Diane had a gala. My 21st was a text message and a $50 gift card to a coffee shop I did not drink at. Sloane's birthdays were national holidays, trips to Cabo, rented yachts, hotel buyouts. I was not jealous, not really. I had learned a long time ago that invisibility was safer than scrutiny. If they forgot me, they could not criticize me. I typed slowly. That is really not necessary. I was just going to do dinner with friends. The response was immediate. Diane, nonsense. It is your 30th a milestone. I have already booked the Marigold Room. My stomach dropped. The Marigold Room. That was not a venue. That was a statement. It was where senators announced their campaigns. It was where old money went to pat itself on the back. A dinner there cost more than my car. Sloane, the Marigold Room. Damn. Okay, Ella. Mom is pulling out the big guns. Diane, it is going to be perfect. Just close family and friends. About 40 people. I want everything to be special for you. Sweetheart. I read that last word 3 times. Sweetheart. Diane never used pet names. Not for me. Sloane was Angel, or Princess. Paul was Darling when she needed something. I was Ella. Sometimes Eleanor when I was in trouble. But never Sweetheart. The word sat on the screen like a trap. It felt rehearsed. It felt like a costume she was putting on because the audience demanded it. Why now? Why, after 30 years of indifference? Was she suddenly rolling out a red carpet? I walked over to my window and looked out at the alleyway below. A stray cat was picking through a trash can. I thought about the lawyer. She wanted to make sure you had a head start. Elliot Barnes calls me at 8 o'clock to tell me about a secret inheritance. 2 hours later, Diane announces the most lavish public display of affection she has ever directed at me. Coincidence, no. In the Foster family. There were no coincidences. There was only leverage. Diane knew. I did not know how she knew. Maybe she had a contact at the firm. Maybe she had sniffed out the existence of the blind trust. Maybe she just sensed that her control over the narrative was about to slip. But she knew something was coming, and this party was her preemptive strike. She was not throwing me a birthday party. She was building a stage. If I accepted the party, I was the grateful daughter. I was the recipient of her generosity. If I later tried to fight her, or claim whatever Maggie had left me, I would look like a monster. Look at all we did for her. She would say, look at the party we threw. And this is how she repays us. It was a masterful play. It weaponized gratitude. My phone buzzed again. Diane, Paul is so excited too. Aren't you? Paul? Yes. Looking forward to it. He typed like a hostage. I looked at the notifications stacking up. Invitations were probably already being drafted. The menu was probably already chosen. She did not ask me what I wanted to eat. She did not ask me who I wanted to invite. This had nothing to do with me. I was the prop. I felt a surge of panic. The old reflex to fold, to apologize, to say thank you so much. Mom, you shouldn't have. To make myself small so she wouldn't have to shrink me. But then I remembered the lawyer's voice. Only you. Maggie had bypassed them. Maggie, who saw everything, had looked at the future and seen this moment. She knew Diane would try to swallow me whole. So she had given me a knife. I just had to go pick it up. I picked up the phone. I did not type a refusal. I did not type a thank you. I typed, sounds great. I will be there. I set the phone down on the counter. My hands were trembling. Just a little. Not from fear, but from adrenaline. The trap was set. The jaws were open, waiting for me to step inside. Diane thought she was luring a sheep to the slaughter. She had no idea that by the time I walked into the Marigold Room, I would be the one holding the teeth. I went into my bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. I needed to find my birth certificate and my passport for the meeting tomorrow. I needed to be ready. The game had started 2 hours ago. I was already behind, but as I dug through my closet, pushing aside old coats and shoeboxes, I realized something else. For the first time in 30 years, I was not playing by her rules. I was playing by Maggie's. And Maggie played to win. The offices of Barnes, Caldwell, and Lewis were located on the 42nd floor of a slate-gray tower on Market Street. 12 stories above the chaos of the city. The waiting room smelled like old leather, lemon oil, and the specific, quiet confidence of money that has been compounding since the 19th century. It was a space designed to intimidate. The receptionist did not smile when I gave my name. She simply pressed a button and nodded toward a pair of heavy double doors. Elliot Barnes was waiting for me. He was an older man, perhaps 60, with silver hair cut with military precision and a suit that cost more than my first car. He did not offer me coffee. He did not ask about the weather. He gestured to a leather wingback chair opposite his massive desk, waited for me to sit, and then locked the door. The sound of that lock clicking into place was the loudest thing I had heard all morning. "Ms. Foster," he began, sitting down and folding his hands on the desk. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have a considerable amount of ground to cover, and discretion is paramount." My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "You said on the phone that my grandmother left documents, but the probate was closed months ago. My father was the executor." "Your father was the executor of the public estate," Barnes corrected, his voice dry and precise. "He handled the liquid assets, the stocks, the vacation home in the Hamptons. Those were standard bequests. However, Margaret Foster created a separate, private trust 3 years ago. I am the sole trustee, and the terms of that trust dictated that its contents be revealed to you, and only you, exactly 6 months after her passing." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy. I could see the bulk of the papers inside. On the back, centered on the flap, was a seal of red wax stamped with the initials M.F. I stared at it. I had seen that seal on birthday cards when I was a child. Seeing it here, in this cold, sterile office, felt like seeing a ghost. Barnes slid the envelope across the mahogany desk. The sound of paper sliding on wood was a whisper that screamed. "Open it," he said. My hands were trembling slightly as I broke the seal. The wax cracked. A sharp snapping sound. I pulled out the contents. There were 3 distinct items. The first was a thick document bound in blue legal paper. The second was a standard envelope with my name handwritten on it in Maggie's looping script. The third was a smaller, thicker packet, also sealed with wax, bearing a label typed on an old typewriter, "Open only when absolutely necessary." "Start with the blue document," Barnes instructed. I unfolded the legal paper. It was a certified copy of a last will and testament. I skipped the preamble, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, looking for names, for numbers, for meaning. Then I saw it. Clause 4. I, Margaret Elizabeth Foster, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of the real property located at 742 Harrogate Lane, comprising the main residence, the guest structures, and the surrounding 12 acres of land, to my granddaughter, Ella Foster. The room seemed to tilt. The air went thin. "Harrogate Lane," I whispered. "The estate." "The main line house," Barnes confirmed. But I looked up at him, my brain refusing to process the words on the page. "My parents live there. Diane has lived there for 20 years. She renovated the entire east wing. She calls it her ancestral home." "She calls it that," Barnes said, a hint of steel entering his voice. "But the deed was never in her name. It was never in your father's name. It remained solely in Margaret's name until the moment of her death. And per this will, which was signed, witnessed, and notarized 3 years ago, the title transfers immediately to you." I stared at the paper. The house was worth millions. 5 million. 6. I did not even know. It was a historic landmark. It was the physical manifestation of the Foster dynasty. It was the stage upon which Diane performed her life, and Maggie had given it to me. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why would she do this? She knew how much Diane wanted that house. She knew this would start a war." "Perhaps," Barnes said, leaning back. "Or perhaps she knew that as long as you had nothing, you were vulnerable. This is not just a house, Ms. Foster. It is leverage. It is a shield. He tapped the document. This will is airtight. We have video recordings of the signing to prove competency. We have 3 witnesses, none of whom are beneficiaries. We have medical evaluations from the same day confirming her cognitive state was perfect. Your mother will try to contest it. She will claim undue influence. She will claim dementia. She will fail. He spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who had already fought this battle in his head 1,000 times. I looked at the second item the letter addressed to me. Read the letter later, Barnes advised quietly, when you are alone, but the third item, he pointed to the small, sealed packet, that is the most important piece. I reached for the small packet. It felt dense, like it contained layers of folded paper, maybe photographs. The warning typed on the front stared up at me. Open only when absolutely necessary. What is in here? I asked. I do not know, Barnes lied. I could tell he was lying. He was a good lawyer, but he respected Maggie too much to be a good actor. Your grandmother instructed me to seal those documents myself. Based on files she provided, she gave me specific instructions to tell you this. The house is your shield. The contents of that packet are your sword. He leaned forward, his gray eyes locking onto mine. Do not open it out of curiosity. Ella, do not open it because you are angry. Open it only if they try to destroy you. Because once you break that seal, there is no going back. The information inside will not just win a legal battle, it will dismantle the family. I pulled my hand back as if the packet were radioactive. Dismantle the family, I repeated. The Fosters rely on a certain narrative, Barnes said carefully. Margaret was the keeper of the truth. Now, you are... He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. He walked around the desk and handed me a large manila folder to carry the documents. One last thing, he said as I packed the papers away. My movements numb and robotic. You mentioned a birthday party. Yes, Diane is throwing it next month. Go, Barnes said. Let them play their games. Let them think they have the power. But know that the moment you walk out of this office, you are the landlord of their lives. They just do not know it yet. He opened the door for me. Prepare yourself, Ella, he said, his voice low. Prepare for what they will try when they realize you cannot be controlled. That night, my apartment felt different. The walls felt thinner. The shadows felt deeper. I had left the lights off, sitting on the floor of my living room with a single candle burning on the coffee table. It was midnight. The city outside was asleep, but my mind was racing at 100 miles an hour. The documents were spread out on the rug before me. The will, the sealed packet, the letter. I picked up the letter. My grandmother's handwriting was spidery but elegant. The ink blue and steady. I took a deep breath and opened it. My dearest Ella, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the sharks are likely circling. I am sorry I had to leave you in the tank, but I have tried to give you the biggest stick I could find. I know you have spent your whole life feeling like you had to apologize for existing. I saw it. I saw how Diane looked at you. I saw how Paul looked away. I saw how they made you feel like a charity case, a tax write-off, an outsider who should be grateful for the scraps from their table. I need you to know something, and I need you to believe it. You were never a charity case. You belong in this family more than anyone ever told you. In fact, you have more right to the name Foster than Diane ever did. I have left you the house because it is the only way to make them see you. They respect property. They respect power. Now you have both. But they will fight you. Diane will not give up her throne easily. She will lie. She will threaten. She will try to humiliate you. If she does, if she pushes you into a corner and tries to take what is yours, then you open the other packet. It contains the proof I kept hidden for 30 years. It contains the documentation of where you really came from and what they really did. I kept the secret to protect the family. But a family that treats you like a stranger does not deserve protection. Be brave, my girl. You are the only honest thing in that house. Love. Maggie. I lowered the letter. A single tear tracked down my cheek. but I wiped it away impatiently. You belong in this family more than anyone ever told you. What did that mean? I looked at the small, sealed packet. It sat there on the rug, innocent-looking, yet pulsing with a terrifying potential. Proof, documentation. I reached out and touched the wax seal. I wanted to rip it open. I wanted to know. I wanted to tear down the mystery right now. But I heard Barnes's voice in my head. Open it only if they try to destroy you. And I heard Aunt Nora's voice, a memory from years ago. Don't show your hand until the bets are on the table. I stood up. I walked to my closet and pulled out a small fireproof safe I used to keep my passport and birth certificate. I placed the sealed packet inside. I locked it. I put the key in a hollowed-out book on my shelf. Then I went back to the living room. I took the will and the letter. I walked to my scanner. I spent the next hour making copies. I scanned them to a cloud drive. I emailed them to a new, secure account. I printed 3 physical copies and hid them in different places, one taped under my dresser drawers, one in my winter coat pocket, one in my desk at work. I was not acting like a granddaughter who had just received a gift. I was acting like a soldier digging a trench, because as I read Maggie's letter again, I realized something that chilled my blood. She had left me the house not just as a gift, but as a trap for Diane. She knew Diane would attack. She knew Diane would try to destroy me, and she had given me the nuclear launch codes to fire back. I looked at the calendar on my wall. The 26th, the birthday party. Diane was planning an ambush. I knew that now. She was going to use that party to solidify her narrative, to paint me as the lucky little orphan she had saved. I looked at the copy of the will in my hand. 742 Harrogate Lane. Diane was going to stand up at that party and brag about her house, her family, her generosity. She had no idea that she was already trespassing. I turned off the candle. The room went black. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing lines I would not say for another month. Prepare for what they will try when they realize you cannot be controlled. I was ready. Let them try. To understand the massacre at the Marigold Room, you have to understand the panic that preceded it. I did not witness these moments in real time. Of course, I was busy working, sleeping, and naively believing that a birthday dinner was just a birthday dinner. But in the aftermath, when the depositions were filed and the text messages were subpoenaed, the timeline of my mother's conspiracy became as clear as a blueprint. I can see it now. I can picture every movement, every hushed conversation, every calculation made in the cold, quiet rooms of the house she thought she owned. It began 3 weeks before the party. On a Tuesday afternoon, Diane Foster was standing in the solarium of the Harrogate Lane estate. She was likely pruning the orchids, not because she enjoyed gardening, but because she liked the idea of controlling something beautiful. The house was her masterpiece. For 20 years, she had curated every inch of it. She had replaced the original Victorian drapes with Italian silk. She had fired 3 contractors to get the molding in the library exactly right. She did not see herself as a resident. She saw herself as the curator of a museum dedicated to her own taste. Then the phone rang. It was not a lawyer. It was Patricia, a woman Diane played bridge with, a woman whose husband worked in the county probate clerk's office. Patricia owed Diane a favor because Diane had gotten her daughter into the local debutante society. The conversation would have been short. Patricia would have whispered that she saw a flag on the file, a delay in the final recording of the deed, a request for a certified copy of a secondary testament pulled by a firm called Barnes, Caldwell, and Lewis. I can imagine the color draining from Diane's face. She knew that firm. She knew they were Maggie's attack dogs. Diane would have hung up the phone and stood there in the silence of the house she loved more than her children. The walls, painted a specific shade of cream she had spent 6 months selecting, suddenly must have felt like they were dissolving. The panic did not come from a place of sorrow. It came from entitlement. That house is mine. She would have thought, the logic of a narcissist is a closed loop. I have lived here. I have suffered Paul's silence here. I have hosted the mayor here. Therefore, it is mine. She would have spiraled quickly. If there was a secondary testament, if Barnes was involved, it meant Maggie had done something spiteful. And if Maggie had done something spiteful, it almost certainly involved me. In Diane's mind, I was the flaw in the diamond. I was the variable she could never quite solve. She walked out of the solarium and marched upstairs to Sloane's room. My sister was likely lounging on her bed, scrolling through social media. Surrounded by the debris of her lifestyle shopping bags, half-drank iced coffees, expensive skincare products. Sloane was 26, but lived with the perpetual, suspended adolescence of the very rich. Diane needed an ally. Paul was useless. He would crumble at the first sign of conflict. But Sloane was vicious. And more importantly, Sloane was expensive. "We have a problem," Diane announced, closing the door behind her. Sloane probably did not even look up from her phone. "What did the caterer quit?" "Your grandmother," Diane said, her voice tight. She might have left the house to Ella. That would have gotten Sloane's attention. She would have sat up, the phone dropping to the duvet. "What? She can't do that. Dad gets the house. Then we get the house." "There is a will," Diane said, pacing the room. "A secret one. If Ella gets this estate, Sloane, do you know what happens?" Diane knew exactly which buttons to push. She did not appeal to family loyalty. She appealed to vanity. "If Ella takes this house," Diane continued, "she will sell it, or she will move in and kick us out. Where will you live? In a condo who pays for your lease on the Range Rover if our assets are frozen during litigation? Who pays for your studio time?" Sloane's face would have twisted in horror. To Sloane, I was not a person. I was an obstruction to her comfort. "She is such a bitch," Sloane would have said, the word coming easy. "She always acted like she was better than us." "She is ungrateful," Diane corrected, rewriting history in real time. "We took her in. We gave her a name. We gave her a life. And this is how she repays us, by stealing our home." Diane sat on the edge of the bed, taking Sloane's hand. This was the moment the plan shifted from defense to offense. Diane did not just want to win a legal battle. She knew that if it went to court, Barnes might win. The will was likely valid. So she needed to make sure it never went to court. She needed to break me before I could even file the paperwork. "We have to stop her," Diane whispered. "We have to make her feel so small, so ashamed, that she wouldn't dare try to claim this place. We need to remind her of what she really is." "What is she?" Sloane asked, already knowing the answer Diane wanted. "A financial mistake," Diane said. "A write-off." The plan formed in that bedroom, amidst the clutter of designer clothes. It was simple, brutal, and theatrical. They would throw a party, a birthday party. They would lure me in with kindness, surround me with people, and then, when the room was full and the attention was piqued, they would strip me naked metaphorically. Diane believed in the power of public shame. She believed that if you humiliated someone deeply enough, they would disappear. "I need you to record it," Diane told Sloane. "When I give the toast, I want it on video. I want her reaction. I want everyone to see her crying. If we have it on tape, she can't play the victim later. We control the narrative." Sloane smiled. It was the smile of someone who finally had a project. "I will live stream it, or at least post it immediately. We can caption it. Ungrateful adoptee tries to steal family estate." "Perfect," Diane said. "Over the next 2 weeks." Diane curated the guest list with the precision of a sniper. She did not invite my real friends, the ones from college or the few people I trusted. She invited the audience that would hurt the most. She invited the charity ladies, the women from the hospital board, who smiled with too many teeth and lived for misfortune. She invited the couples from the country club who had always looked at me with vague suspicion, and cruelly. She reached out to my workplace. She invited 3 of my colleagues, including a junior partner, framing it as a networking opportunity to celebrate my success. She wanted my professional life to witness my personal destruction. She wanted to ensure that when I walked into work the next day, the shame would be waiting for me in the break room. But the centerpiece of her plan was the speech. I know she rehearsed it. I know because the housekeeper later mentioned hearing Diane talking to herself in the dining room late at night. Diane stood at the head of the empty table at Harrogate Lane, holding a silver serving spoon as a stand-in for a microphone. She practiced the cadence. She practiced the pause after tax benefits. She wanted it to land as a joke, a light-hearted quip that concealed a dagger. "We adopted Ella for the tax benefits," she would say to the empty room, testing the acoustics. She tried it with a laugh. She tried it with a sigh. She needed the perfect balance of long-suffering mother and witty hostess. She needed the room to laugh with her, to agree that I was, indeed, a ridiculous investment that had not paid off. She viewed me not as a daughter, but as a faulty product she had purchased 30 years ago, and now that the product was trying to claim ownership of the factory, she was going to recall it. Meanwhile, Sloane was handling the technical side. She cleared the storage on her iPhone to ensure she had 40 minutes of high-definition recording time. She created a group chat with 3 of her friends who were coming to the dinner girls who were just as vapid and cruel as she was. The group chat was titled, "The Roast of Ella Foster." They traded ideas for hashtags. They bet on how long it would take for me to cry. Sloane messaged, "I bet she runs out before dessert." Diane's strategy relied on one fatal assumption that I was still the person they had trained me to be. They thought I was soft. They thought I sought their approval. They thought that when Diane stood up and called me a write-off, I would hang my head and accept the label, because that is what I had done for 30 years. Diane stood in front of her vanity mirror the night before the party, applying her night cream. She looked at her reflection, the woman who had married a Foster, the woman who had clawed her way into this house, the woman who deserved to keep it. She whispered her closing thought to the mirror, a mantra that justified everything she was about to do. "If she runs, she forfeits," Diane told her reflection. "People like her always run." She went to sleep that night sleeping the deep, restful sleep of the self-righteous. She had no idea that while she was rehearsing a speech, I was memorizing a will. She was bringing a microphone to the party. I was bringing a grenade. The days leading up to the 26th of October felt less like waiting for a birthday and more like waiting for a subpoena. I sat in the break room at Northline Urban Studio. Watching the steam rise from a paper cup of coffee, the office was buzzing with the usual Tuesday chaos plotters jamming, phones ringing, the junior associates panicking over zoning codes, but I felt removed from it all, as if I were watching the world through a pane of thick, soundproof glass. Caleb Mercer sat across from me. Caleb was the structural engineer I worked with most closely, a man who viewed human emotions with the same skepticism he viewed cantilevered balconies. He was blunt, brilliant, and the only person in my life who knew that my perfect family was actually a well-dressed demolition crew. I had told him everything, the lawyer, the will, the invitation to the Marigold Room. Caleb leaned back in his plastic chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at me with dark, serious eyes. "So," he said, his voice low, "let me get the physics of this straight. Your mother knows something is up, so she builds a stage this party. She invites an audience, and she expects you to walk onto it so she can drop a piano on your head." "That is about the size of it," I said, tracing the rim of my cup. "And you are going—" "I have to go. Caleb, if I don't, she wins by default. She tells everyone I am ungrateful. She spins the story that I estranged myself. She controls the narrative." Caleb shook his head. "Ella, you are walking into a staged fire. You do not walk into a fire unless you have an extinguisher or a flamethrower." "I have the will," I whispered. "I have the house." "That is legal leverage," Caleb corrected. "That works in a courtroom. It does not work in a dining room when 40 people are staring at you and your mother is holding a microphone. You need to be ready for the psychological warfare. Diane is not going to sue you at dinner. She is going to break you." He was right. I knew he was right. I had spent 30 years being broken by Diane Foster. I knew her playbook. She did not use fists. She used implications. She used tone. She used the lethal weapon of public embarrassment. I am going to prepare, I said, and for the first time in my life, I meant it not as a defensive measure, but as an offensive one. The preparation began with logistics. I treated it like a project at work. I needed a foundation, I needed structural support, and I needed to secure my assets. I spent my lunch hour at a bank 3 blocks away from the office, not my usual branch, but a national chain where the Fosters had no accounts. I rented a safety deposit box. The teller, a cheerful woman named Sarah, had no idea that the documents I was sliding across the metal counter were capable of detonating a dynasty. I placed the original certified will and the small, sealed packet inside the long metal box. I stared at the packet for a long moment, open only when absolutely necessary. It sat there in the gray metal gloom, silent and dangerous. I locked the box and put the key on a separate ring, hidden deep in my purse. Next, I went to the law library. I did not want to rely solely on Elliot Barnes. He was Maggie's lawyer, and while he seemed to be on my side, I needed to understand the battlefield myself. I read up on estate contests. I learned about undue influence. I learned about testamentary capacity. I learned that in the state of Pennsylvania, the burden of proof would be on Diane to prove Maggie was incompetent, not on me to prove she was sane. I wrote down a timeline. I took a piece of graph paper and mapped it out. Year 1, adoption finalized. Year 5. Diane jokes about returning me to the agency. Year 10. Gavin Foster dies uncle. Year 20, I leave for college. Funding is threatened 3 times. 6 months ago, Maggie dies. 2 weeks ago, the lawyer calls. Today, the trap. Seeing it on paper helped. It turned the emotional chaos of my life into data, and data could be managed. But the hardest part was not the legal preparation, it was the psychological fortification. 2 days before the party, I went to Saks Fifth Avenue. Usually, when I shopped for family events, I shopped with Diane's voice in my head. Don't wear anything too bright. Ella, you wash out easily. Don't wear anything too tight. It looks desperate. Stick to pastels. Stick to beige. Be background. I walked onto the sales floor. The air conditioning blasting. The scent of expensive perfume thick in the air. A sales associate approached me, assessing my work clothes' gray slacks, a sensible blouse. Can I help you find something? Perhaps something for the office? She asked. No, I said. I need a dress. For a birthday party. My 30th. Lovely. What sort of look are you going for? I looked at a rack of polite, navy blue cocktail dresses. The old Ella would have bought one of those. The old Ella would have blended into the upholstery at the Marigold Room. I want to take up space, I said. The sales associate blinked, then smiled. It was a real smile. Right this way. She brought me a dress I never would have touched a month ago. It was emerald green silk. It had a high neck, but a back that plunged dangerously low. It was sleek, architectural, and completely unapologetic. I put it on in the dressing room. I looked in the mirror. The color made my eyes look sharper. The cut made me stand taller. I did not look like a write-off. I looked like someone who owned the building. I looked at the price tag. $2,000. It was an obscene amount of money. It was rent. It was 3 months of student loan payments. I handed the woman my credit card. My hand did not shake. This was not a purchase. It was armor. If I was going to walk into the lion's den, I was not going to look like a lamb. I was going to look like the hunter. The night before the party. My phone rang. It was 9 o'clock. The caller ID said, Aunt Nora. I stared at the screen. Nora never called. We texted occasionally, usually her sending me sarcastic commentary on Diane's Facebook posts, but a phone call was serious. I picked up. Hello? Ella? Nora's voice was raspy, the sound of a woman who had smoked unfiltered cigarettes since 1985. Are you ready for tomorrow? As ready as I can be, I said. She is planning a show, Nora said. I spoke to Paul. He is a wreck. He tried to talk her out of the speech, but you know how she gets when she has an audience. The speech, Bo, I asked, though I already knew. She is going to do the adoption bit. The tax joke. She's been refining it. She wants to hurt you. Ella. She thinks if she hurts you enough, you will be too weak to fight for the house. I know. There was a silence on the line. Then Nora asked the question that stopped my heart. Do you have Maggie's packet with you? I froze. I had never told Nora about the packet. I had never told anyone but Caleb about the will. How do you know about the packet? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Maggie told me, Nora said. Before she died, she told me she was leaving you the house, and she told me she was leaving you the insurance. Insurance? The second packet, Nora said. The one inside the envelope, that is the insurance. What is in it? Nora. I don't know the specifics, she said, and for the first time, she sounded tired. But I know it has to do with Gavin, and I know it terrified Maggie enough to hide it for 30 years. Gavin, I asked. Dad's brother. The one who died. Just have it on you, Nora said, ignoring my question. Do not leave it in a safe. Do not leave it at home. If Diane goes nuclear, you need to be able to push the button. Do you understand? I understand. Good. I will be there. I am flying in from Chicago in the morning. I won't let you stand alone, kid. But you have to be the one to drop the hammer. She hung up. I sat on my bed, staring at the phone. Gavin, the uncle I never knew, the man whose name was spoken in hushed tones. If it was spoken at all. What did he have to do with me? What did he have to do with the house? I went to my desk. I had work to do. I turned on my scanner. I took the copies of the will and Maggie's letter that I had printed out. I made 3 more sets. I put one set in a folder labeled Reference. I put another set in a plain manila envelope. Then I took out my phone and opened the voice memo app. I needed to record something. Not for them, for me. I hit the red button. My name is Ella Foster, I said to the empty room. Today is October 25th. Tomorrow is my 30th birthday. I am recording this so that I do not forget what is real. I took a breath. Diane Foster has spent my entire life telling me I should be grateful she saved me. She has told me that I was expensive. She has told me that I was an investment for tax purposes. She has made me feel like an employee who is constantly on the verge of being fired. I paused, listening to the traffic outside. But I have read Maggie's will. I own 742 Harrogate Lane. That is a fact. It is not a feeling. It is a legal reality. Diane is going to lie tomorrow. She is going to try to make me feel small, but she cannot change the ink on that paper. I continued speaking for 10 minutes. I listed every microaggression I could remember. I listed the time she forgot to pick me up from surgery. I listed the time she gave my room to a guest and made me sleep on the couch. I cataloged the cruelty so that when she smiled at me tomorrow and called me sweetheart, I would not be seduced by the lie. I saved the recording. I titled it Reality Check. Finally, I went to the closet where I kept my everyday purse. I took out the key to the safety deposit box. Aunt Nora was right. If things went wrong, if Diane managed to block the will or claim I was incompetent, I needed the insurance. I drove back to the bank the next morning. The day of the party, right as they opened at 9 o'clock, I retrieved the sealed packet back in my apartment. I held it. It was thick. It felt like it contained the weight of 1,000 secrets. I got dressed. I put on the emerald green dress. I put on my heels 4 inches, sharp as daggers. I put on diamond studs that I had bought myself. I picked up my clutch. It was a sleek, hard-shelled bag. I slid the folded copy of the will inside. Then, I slid the sealed packet in next to it. It barely fit. I had to press down to get the clasp to close. The clutch felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a bag should be. It felt like I was carrying a loaded gun. I looked in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me was not the Ella Foster who used to hide in the library during parties. This woman was calm. This woman was cold. No screaming, I said to my reflection. No spiraling, just facts. I walked out of the apartment and called an Uber. The driver asked me if I was going somewhere special. Yes, I said, watching the city blur past the window. I am going to a demolition. The elevator ride to the 30th floor of the Liberty Spire took exactly 45 seconds. I counted them. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. It was a habit I had developed as a child to manage anxiety, turning time into something I could measure and control. Beside me, the reflection in the polished brass doors showed a woman in an emerald green silk dress, spine straight, clutching a hard-shelled bag like a weapon. I did not look like the daughter who usually showed up to family events, the one in beige, the one who apologized for taking up space. I looked like a stranger. When the doors slid open, the sound hit me first. It was the low, cultured hum of expensive socialization. The Marigold Room was a glass box suspended above the night, glowing with the amber light of 100 beeswax candles. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Philadelphia, the city grid laid out in lines of gold and white fire. But no one was looking at the view. They were looking at the entrance. As I stepped onto the plush carpet, the conversation in the room seemed to stumble. It did not stop completely. These people were too well trained for that, but it faltered. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I felt the physical weight of 40 gazes landing on me at once. It was a sensation of prickly heat, a collective curiosity that felt less like a welcome and more like an assessment. They were checking for cracks. They were looking to see if the rumors Diane had doubtless been spreading were true. Diane was the first to move. She detached herself from a cluster of women near the bar and glided toward me. She was wearing silver, a sequined gown that caught the candlelight and threw it back as sharp, glittering sparks. Her hair was an architectural marvel of hairspray and blonde highlights, immobile and perfect. "There she is," Diane announced, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "The birthday girl finally graces us with her presence." She reached me and pulled me into a hug. It was a performance of affection, not an act of it. Her body was stiff, a rigid board against mine, and she patted my back 3 times, pat, 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 before pulling away. It was the way a politician hugs a constituent when the cameras are rolling. "You look." Diane stepped back, her eyes raking over my green dress. She lingered on the plunging back, then the sharp cut of the neckline. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, quickly smoothed over. She had expected me to look dowdy. She had expected a victim. "Distinctive. Very bold. Ella, did you keep the receipt?" "I like it," I said, my voice steady. "Thank you for organizing this, Mother." "Oh, it is nothing." She waved a hand, turning to the room to ensure everyone witnessed her benevolence. "You know Paul and I would do anything for you, anything to help." Paul was standing 3 feet behind her, holding a Scotch glass with both hands. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, perhaps on a submarine, or in a coma. When he saw me looking at him, he flinched. He walked forward slowly, his movements heavy. "Happy birthday, Ella," he mumbled. He offered his hand. I looked at it. My father. The man who had signed the checks but never the permission slips. The man who had let Diane rewrite reality for 3 decades because it was easier than fighting her. I took his hand. It was cold and damp. He squeezed my fingers briefly, then dropped my hand as if it were burning him. He could not meet my eyes. He stared somewhere over my left shoulder, fixated on a waiter carrying a tray of crab cakes. "Right." Diane clapped her hands, steering me further into the room. "Come say hello to everyone. Sloan is dying to see you." Sloan was not dying to see me. Sloan was positioned near the center of the room, strategically backlit by the city skyline. She was holding her phone up, the lens pointed directly at us as we approached. She did not lower it. She did not wave. She did not say hello. She just adjusted the focus. "Hey, Ella," Sloan said from behind the screen. "Look here. Give me a wave. It is for the story." I looked into the black circle of the lens. I saw the ring light reflecting in the glass. "Hello, Sloan?" "Love the dress," Sloan said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that rots teeth. "It is very brave. Is it vintage?" No, I said. It is new. Cute, she murmured, already panning the camera away to capture the floral arrangements. Bored with me now that she had the establishing shot, I was paraded through the room like a show pony. I shook hands with the charity ladies, women with tight facelifts and diamonds the size of knuckles, who told me how saintly Diane was for all the work she did. Your mother talks about you all the time, Mrs. Gable said, patting my arm. She worries so much. It is so hard these days, isn't it, finding one's footing? The implication was clear. We know you are a mess. We know you are a burden. I am doing quite well, actually, I said. I was just promoted to senior associate at the firm. Mrs. Gable blinked, clearly not briefed on that fact. Oh, well, isn't that nice? I saw my coworkers in the corner, Sarah, the marketing director, and Mark, a junior partner. They looked uncomfortable, holding their drinks like shields. Diane had invited them to witness this, to blur the lines between my private humiliation and my professional reputation. I walked over to them. Mark looked relieved to see a familiar face. Ella, Mark said, this is quite a venue. You didn't tell us your family owned the city. They don't, I said tightly. They just rent the view. I'm sorry you were dragged into this. Mark? No, he stammered. Your mother was very insistent. She said it was a milestone. Before I could answer, I felt a hand on my elbow. It was not the pinching grasp of my mother, nor the damp touch of my father. It was firm, dry, and strong. I turned. Aunt Nora was standing there. She looked like a thundercloud in a room full of marshmallows. She was wearing a sharp black tuxedo suit, her silver hair cut short and spiked. She had not been on the guest list Diane showed me. Aunt Nora, I breathed. She didn't invite me, Nora said, her voice a low rasp. I heard about it from Paul. He called me yesterday in a panic, said Diane was planning something. She is, I said. Nora looked at me, really looked at me. She saw the tension in my jaw. She saw the way my knuckles were white against the clutch. Her gaze dropped to the bag, then back to my eyes. She nodded, a microscopic movement. Good, she whispered. She leaned in close, smelling of tobacco and expensive soap. Whatever happens tonight, Ella, do not protect her illusion. She built this stage. You just have to be the one to drop the curtain. I am ready, I said. Ladies and gentlemen. Diane's voice rang out, cutting through the chatter. If everyone could please find their seats, we are ready to begin service. The guests shuffled toward the massive U-shaped table that dominated the center of the room. Place cards were set in calligraphy on heavy cardstock. I walked around the perimeter, looking for my name. I found it at the center of the U, the focal point of the entire arrangement, but it was the chair that made my stomach turn. Every other chair in the room was a standard, high-backed banquet chair covered in white linen. Mine was different. Mine was wrapped in a massive, shimmering gold ribbon, tied in a comically large bow on the back. It looked like a high chair. It looked like something you would set up for a toddler or a prize poodle. It was designed to infantilize me, to make me look ridiculous, to make me a prop. I hesitated. I saw Sloane smirk from across the table. She had her phone propped up against a centerpiece. The lens trained on my seat. Sit down, I told myself. Do not make a scene yet. Let them think they have won the first round. I sat. The ribbon crunched behind me. The bow was so large I couldn't lean back comfortably. I had to sit perched on the edge, spine rigid, which only made me look more tense, more fragile. Dinner began. It was a blur of courses I couldn't taste. A lobster bisque that looked like pink paint, a salad with artisanal greens that required too much chewing. The conversation around me was polite, suffocatingly so. To my left was a man from my father's golf club who wanted to talk about interest rates. To my right was one of Diane's friends who kept asking me if I was seeing anyone special, with the pitying tone one uses for the terminally ill. No, I said for the third time. I am focused on my career. Of course, dear, she patted my hand. Work is a good distraction. But I wasn't listening to them. I was watching Diane. She was seated at the head of the table, commanding the room. She wasn't eating. She was scanning the guests, gauging the atmosphere. She was waiting for the wine to do its work. She was waiting for the edges of the room to soften, for the guests to become pliable and receptive. She looked happy, not the happiness of joy, but the happiness of a general surveying a battlefield where the enemy has not yet shown up. She looked at me occasionally, offering a tight, encouraging smile, as if to say, "Don't worry, it will all be over soon." I watched Sloane. She was not eating either. She was managing the digital production. She moved her phone occasionally to get reaction shots from the guests. She was texting under the table, her thumbs flying. I could imagine the captions she was drafting. Family dinner vibes. So awkward. The servers moved like shadows, clearing the entree plates. The clatter of silverware on china died down. The heavy Cabernets had been poured and consumed. The room was warm, lulled into a false sense of security. This was it. I felt the shift in the air before it happened. It was a tightening, a sudden drop in pressure. Diane pushed her chair back. She stood up. She picked up a teaspoon and tapped it against her crystal champagne flute. Ding, ding, ding. The sound was sharp, piercing. It silenced the room instantly. The low murmur of 40 conversations was severed, replaced by an expectant hush. Every face turned toward her. Diane beamed. She reached for the microphone that had been set up on a small stand next to her chair. She held it with the familiarity of a performer. "Thank you," she said, her voice amplified, booming slightly in the acoustic glass box. "Thank you all so much for coming." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the attention pool around her. She looked at me. Her eyes were bright, hard, and absolutely merciless. I promised myself I wouldn't get emotional. She laughed, a delicate, practiced sound. But looking around this room, seeing all of our dearest friends, and looking at my daughter, she gestured to me in my ribbon-wrapped chair. The spotlight of 40 pairs of eyes swung toward me. I did not smile. I did not look down. I held my chin high, my hand resting on the clutch in my lap. Inside that clutch, the wax seal on the envelope felt hot against the lining. Diane took a breath. She was ready to begin the execution. "I have a few words I want to say," she purred into the mic, "about how we got here, about the truth of this family." Diane held the room in the palm of her manicured hand. The silence was absolute, the kind of vacuum that exists right before a thunderclap. She leaned into the microphone, her other hand resting casually on the tablecloth. Her posture relaxed. She looked like she was about to tell a heartwarming anecdote about my first steps or my first day at school, but her eyes were dancing with a malicious, glittering light. "You know," Diane said, her voice smooth and conversational, amplifying through the speakers to reach every corner of the glass-walled room. "People always tell Paul and me how saintly we were. They say, 'Oh, Diane, it takes such a special heart to take in a child who isn't your own, to take in a stray.'" She paused for effect. A few guests smiled uncertainly, bobbing their heads. They were waiting for the pivot. They were waiting for the part where she said, "But she became our whole world." That part was not coming. "But we have to be honest tonight," Diane continued, her smile widening until it showed too many teeth. "We are among friends. We didn't do it for the sainthood, and we certainly didn't do it because we needed another mouth to feed." She chuckled, a low, throaty sound. "We did it because our accountant, God rest his soul, told us we were getting killed on capital gains that year. He said, 'Diane, you need a deduction. You need a dependent.'" She looked directly at me. "So, we went out and got one," she said. "We didn't shop for a child. We shopped for a write-off." She let the punchline land. "And that is what Ella has always been to us," Diane announced, raising her glass in a mock toast. "Our little tax benefit, the best financial decision we made in the 90s. Even if the maintenance costs have been a bit high lately," she laughed. It was a loud, performative laugh, inviting the room to join in on the joke. For a second, the only sound in the room was the hum of the air conditioning and the city traffic 30 stories below. The guests did not laugh. They froze. I saw Mrs. Gable's fork hover halfway to her mouth, a piece of lettuce trembling on the tines. I saw Mark, my colleague, look down at his lap, his face burning a bright, embarrassed red. The cruelty was too naked. It was too sharp. It violated the social contract of the main line, which stated that you could destroy people, but you had to do it politely, behind their backs, never with a microphone. Then, a single, shrill laugh cut through the tension. Sloane. My sister was shaking with laughter. Her phone held high, recording every second. "Oh my God!" she gasped, loud enough to be heard over the speakers. "Mom, stop. That is savage. That is so savage." She panned the camera to me, zooming in on my face. She wanted the tears. She wanted the breakdown. She wanted the viral moment of the poor, unwanted adoptee realizing she was nothing but a line item on a ledger. But I was not crying. I was breathing. In, out. I looked at my father. Paul was staring at the tablecloth, as if he could burn a hole through it with his gaze alone. He knew. He knew exactly how vile this was. He knew the truth about Gavin, about the secrets buried in the garden of our lives. And yet he sat there, silent. His silence was a confession. It was an endorsement. By saying nothing, he was signing his name to Diane's cruelty. I felt the anger rise in me. But it was not the hot, chaotic anger of a victim. It was the cold, hard anger of a judge delivering a sentence. Diane was still smiling, waiting for the applause that wasn't coming. But she didn't care. She had said it. She had launched the missile. She looked at me with triumph, expecting me to shrink, to run, to forfeit. I did not shrink. I reached down and unclasped my hard-shelled bag. The click was audible in the quiet room. I pulled out the cream-colored envelope. The red wax seal caught the candlelight, looking like a drop of fresh blood against the white tablecloth. I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor was harsh and deliberate. It broke the spell Diane had cast. Heads turned toward me. The ribbon on my chair fluttered as I stood, casting a long, ridiculous shadow. But I ignored it. I stood tall in my emerald dress, my shoulders back, my chin high. I picked up the envelope. "Thank you, Mother," I said. My voice was not amplified by a microphone, but it didn't need to be. I spoke with the projection I had learned presenting architectural plans to boardrooms of skeptical men. My voice was steady, clear, and terrifyingly calm. "Thank you," I repeated, "for finally choosing honesty. It is a rare look for you, but I think it suits the occasion." Diane's smile faltered. She lowered the microphone slightly. This was not in the script. I was supposed to be sobbing. I was supposed to be running for the elevator. "Oh, Ella," she said, her tone dismissive, trying to regain control. "Don't be dramatic. It was a joke. Sit down before you embarrass yourself." "I am not embarrassed," I said. Walking around the table, I moved slowly, measuring every step. "And I don't think we are done with the truth yet. You started a conversation about assets, about ownership, about who belongs where." I stopped at the head of the table, standing just a few feet from where she stood. I was close enough to see the sudden flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She looked at the envelope in my hand. She saw the seal. She recognized it. I saw her throat swallow, a convulsive movement. She knew Maggie's seal. "You told everyone I was a tax write-off," I said, addressing the room now, making eye contact with the charity ladies, with the country club members, with my coworkers. "You told them I was a financial decision, a guest in your home." I held up the envelope. "My grandmother, Margaret Foster, had a different opinion." "Ella," Diane snapped, her voice losing its sugary coating. "Put that away. This is a party. We are not doing business here." "You made it business when you called me a deduction," I countered, my voice cutting over hers. "You wanted witnesses. You have 40 of them." I ripped the envelope open. The sound was violent in the stillness. I pulled out the blue-bound document, I unfolded it with a snap. "This," I said, holding the document up so the light hit the certified stamp, "is the last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Foster, dated, signed, and witnessed 3 years ago." Diane went pale. Her hand gripped the microphone so hard her knuckles turned white. "That is not possible. The estate was settled. Paul settled it." "Paul settled the liquid assets," I said, looking at my father. He finally looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "But Maggie didn't trust you with the land, did she? Paul, she didn't trust you to keep the house safe." I turned back to Diane. "Clause 4, I read aloud, my voice ringing out like a bell. "I hereby bequeath the entirety of the real property located at 742 Harrogate Lane, including the main residence and all grounds, to my granddaughter, Ella Foster." The room erupted. It wasn't a gasp this time. It was a wave of noise whispers, exclamations, the clinking of silverware being dropped. The guests looked from me to Diane, their eyes wide. They understood what this meant. The house was Diane's identity. It was her stage. And I had just announced that I was the landlord. "Liar," Sloane shrieked. She had stopped laughing. Her phone was still recording, but her hand was shaking. "That is fake. You printed that at Kinko's." "It is certified," I said calmly, tossing the document onto the table in front of Diane. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the linen until it hit her wineglass. "You can check the notary seal. You can call the firm. Barnes, Caldwell, and Lewis." Diane stared at the paper. She didn't touch it. She looked at it as if it were a cobra coiled on her dinner plate. "This is ridiculous," Diane hissed, her voice rising, the microphone picking up the jagged edge of her panic. "You are ruining the evening. You are drunk. Paul, tell her she is drunk." She turned to my father, desperate for backup. "Paul, tell them the house is ours." I looked at Paul. This was the moment, the pivot point of 30 years of silence. "Paul," Diane demanded, her voice shrill. "Do something." Paul looked at Diane. He looked at the woman who had bullied him, silenced him, and turned his family into a performance art piece for 3 decades. Then he looked at me. He looked at the emerald dress. He looked at the document on the table. And then, he looked at the second packet, the one I was still holding in my left hand. The small, thick packet with the warning on the front. He saw it. He knew what was in it. Paul closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were resigned. "Let her finish, Diane," Paul said. His voice was quiet, but in the electrified room, it sounded like a gunshot. Diane recoiled as if he had slapped her. "Excuse me?" I said, "Let her finish," Paul repeated, louder this time. He took a drink of his scotch, his hand trembling. "The will is real, Diane. I knew there was a possibility." "You knew," Diane screamed. The mask was fully off now. The politician was gone. The socialite was gone. There was only a cornered, vicious woman. "You knew she was going to steal my house." "It is not your house," I said. "It never was. It was Maggie's, and now it is mine." I took a step closer to her. I was invading her personal space, breaching the perimeter she had guarded for so long. "You invited these people here to watch me fall," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was intimate and lethal. "You wanted to strip me of my dignity. You wanted to remind me that I don't belong." I raised the second packet, the sealed one, the dangerous one. I held it up right in front of her face so she could read the typewriter font on the label, "Open only when absolutely necessary." Diane's eyes locked onto the packet. She stopped breathing. She recognized the handwriting on the label. She recognized the dates. Her face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ash gray. "The house is just bricks and mortar." "Mother," I said softly, "losing the house is the least of your problems." "Ella," she whispered, and for the first time in my life, I heard genuine fear in her voice. "Don't." "You wanted the truth," I said, relentlessly. "You built this night on the premise of full disclosure, so let's disclose." I tapped the sealed packet against the palm of my hand. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. "The adoption," I said. "The tax benefits. The write-off. That is a cute story. But it is full of holes, isn't it?" The room was deathly silent. Even Sloane had lowered her phone. The waiters were frozen against the walls. "You think the house is the only thing Maggie left me?" I asked. "She left me the receipts. Diane. She left me the paper trail you thought you burned 30 years ago." Diane took a stumbling step back, knocking over her champagne flute. The glass shattered, sending crystal shards and sparkling liquid across the table. No one moved to clean it up. "This isn't the place," Diane stammered, her voice shaking. "We can talk about this at home. We can work this out." "No," I said, echoing the words she had said to herself in the mirror. "If you run, you forfeit." I looked at the audience. I looked at the charity ladies, whose eyes were wide with the thrill of the scandal. I looked at my coworkers, who looked stunned. I looked at Aunt Nora, who raised her whiskey glass to me in a silent salute. "You made this the place," I said to Diane. "You picked the audience. You picked the microphone. You picked the fight." I looked down at the sealed packet in my hand. I could feel the heat radiating off Diane. She was terrified. She knew that what was in this envelope would destroy not just her social standing, but her entire identity. "So," I said, letting the question hang in the air like a guillotine blade, "do you want to keep lying about where I came from, or should I open this and introduce everyone to the real story?" Diane opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Paul, but he was staring into his glass. She looked at Sloane, but Sloane was looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. Diane was alone, and I was just getting started. The sound of Diane's exit was not the dramatic slamming of a door. It was the frantic, staccato clicking of Jimmy Choo heels on polished parquet flooring, a rhythm that sounded less like a departure and more like a retreat under fire. She did not look back. After the glass shattered and the silence stretched into something unbearable, my mother simply broke. The facade of the unflappable mainline matriarch dissolved, revealing the terrified woman beneath. She grabbed her clutch, her knuckles white, and walked too fast toward the elevators. She did not say goodnight to her guests. She did not wait for Paul. She pressed the elevator button repeatedly, as if the sheer force of her will could make the car arrive faster to whisk her away from the wreckage she had caused. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her inside, the room exhaled. Then, chaos broke the vacuum. It started with Sloane, my sister, who had spent the last hour treating my humiliation as content, suddenly realized that the lens had turned. She looked at her phone, then at me, then at the room full of whispering guests. The realization hit her this was not a funny video about a write-off. This was documentation of her mother's public meltdown and her own complicity in it. "Oh God," I heard Sloane mutter. She started tapping furiously on her screen. "Delete, delete." But the digital age is unforgiving. And the Marigold Room was full of people who thrived on the currency of gossip. Sloane had been live streaming to a private group, but she wasn't the only one recording. I saw the flash of screens at the peripheral tables. Mark, my colleague, was texting rapidly, likely updating the entire Northline Urban Studio Slack channel. Mrs. Gable was whispering into her phone, hand cupped over her mouth. "You can't delete it, Sloane," I said, my voice cutting through the murmur. I was still standing at the head of the table, the certified will lying on the tablecloth like a verdict. "The signal is already out." Sloane looked at me with genuine horror. "You ruined everything," she hissed, grabbing her purse. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You destroyed her reputation." "No," I said, picking up my clutch and the sealed packet. "She did that herself. I just provided the paperwork." Sloane ran after Diane, leaving Paul sitting alone at the table. My father looked at the spilled champagne dripping onto the floor. He looked at the empty chair where his wife had sat. He didn't look at me. He stood up slowly, like a man aging 10 years in 10 seconds, and walked out of the room without a word. The party dissolved. Guests mumbled awkward apologies to me as they hurried to the coat check, eyes darting away. They didn't want to be associated with the disaster, but they would absolutely talk about it over brunch for the next decade. Aunt Nora walked up to me, a grim smile on her face. She raised her glass. "Happy birthday, kid," she said. "Best show I have seen in years." The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely digital. By the next morning, the narrative had escaped Diane's control. It was not on the news Diane wasn't a celebrity, but in the insular, high-stakes world of Philadelphia society, the story moved faster than light. I went into work late, expecting silence. Instead, I found a different kind of atmosphere. When I walked into the studio, heads didn't turn away. They nodded. Mark met me at the coffee machine. "The video is circulating," he said quietly. "Someone from the country club uploaded a snippet to TikTok. It has 50,000 views. The caption is, 'Mainline mom calls daughter a tax write-off.'" "Is it bad?" I asked. "For you, no. The comments are 90% on your side. People are horrified." He paused. "But for Diane, it is a massacre." He was right. Over the next 48 hours, I watched Diane's social capital evaporate. It was a fascinating, morbid process. The charity boards, she sat on the hospital gala committee. The Botanical Garden Trust began to distance themselves. I heard through Nora that Diane had been asked to step back from her role as chair of the autumn ball. They didn't say it was because she was a cruel mother. They said it was to allow her time to deal with family matters. But we all knew the truth. Money likes privacy, and Diane had become loud. However, a wounded narcissist does not retreat to a cave to lick her wounds. She attacks. 2 days after the party, my phone rang. It was Elliot Barnes. "Ms. Foster," his voice was clipped, urgent. "We have a situation." "Did she file?" I asked. I was sitting at my desk, staring at a blueprint, but my mind was already in the courtroom. "This morning," Barnes said. "She filed an emergency petition to freeze the assets of the estate. She is contesting the validity of the will." "On what grounds?" "Undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity," Barnes recited. "The usual playbook. She is claiming that in the final years of her life, Margaret was confused, paranoid, and easily manipulated. She is alleging that you took advantage of her mental decline to coerce her into signing over the Harrogate Lane property." "Coerce her?" I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "I didn't even know I was getting the house until 2 weeks ago. I barely saw Maggie the last year because Diane made it so difficult to visit." "We know that," Barnes said. "But Diane is painting a picture. She has affidavits from a private nurse claiming Maggie was forgetful and agitated. She is trying to invalidate the will so the estate reverts to the previous testament, the one that left everything to Paul. Can she win? With the evidence we have, no. But she can tie this up in probate court for 2 years. She can bleed you dry in legal fees. She can make sure you don't step foot in that house until you are 32. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. 2 years. 2 years of Diane living in my house, sleeping in my rooms, pretending she had won. "There is something else," Barnes said, his tone shifting. "Something darker." "What?" "When we received the notice of the contest, I ran a full title search on the property again. Just to be sure everything was clean, I found a lien." "A lien? But the house was paid off in 1990? "It was," Barnes said. "But 6 months ago, 3 weeks before Margaret died, an application was submitted to refinance the estate, a request to pull out $2 million in equity." I stopped breathing. "Did Maggie authorize that?" "No," Barnes said. "The signature on the application is Margaret's, but the notary stamp it looks questionable, and the funds were directed not to Margaret's account, but to a Shell LLC registered in Delaware." "Diane," I whispered. "It fits," Barnes said. "The application was denied because the bank flagged the title transfer issues. But the attempt was there. Ella, this isn't just about a birthday party anymore. If Diane tried to refinance a house she didn't own, using a forged signature. That is fraud. That is a felony. My hand gripped the phone. Suddenly, Diane's desperation made sense. It wasn't just about status. It wasn't just about hating me. She needed the money. She had been living a lifestyle she couldn't afford: the parties, the cars, Sloane's allowance, and she had tried to use Maggie's house as her personal ATM. When Maggie died and the house went to me, Diane wasn't just losing a trophy. She was losing her getaway car. "What do we do?" I asked. "We wait," Barnes said. "Let her depose you. Let her claim Maggie was crazy. Because when we reveal the attempted fraud, her credibility will not just crumble, it will be incinerated." I left work early that day. I couldn't focus. I felt like I was standing on a fault line that was vibrating with an impending earthquake. I went to see Aunt Nora. She was staying at a boutique hotel in Rittenhouse Square. She opened the door wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of club soda. "You look like you have seen a ghost," she said, ushering me in. "Diane tried to mortgage the house," I said, dropping onto the sofa. "Before Maggie died, she forged a signature." Nora didn't look surprised. She walked over to the window and looked out at the street. "Maggie knew," Nora said softly. "She knew. Maggie was sharp until the end. Ella, don't let them tell you otherwise. She saw the mail. She saw the bank inquiries. She knew Diane was trying to liquidate the legacy." Nora turned to me. Her face was hard, etched with the kind of sorrow that comes from watching your family rot from the inside out. "That is why she set up the guardrails," Nora said. "That is why she used Barnes. That is why she gave the house to you. She knew if she left it to Paul, Diane would bleed it dry within 5 years. She knew Paul was too weak to stop her." "Why didn't Paul stop her?" I asked. "He is her husband. He had to know." "Paul," Nora sighed. "Paul has been paying for peace for 30 years. He buys Diane whatever she wants, so she won't look at him, so she won't ask him the hard questions." "What questions?" Nora shook her head. "That is not my story to tell. But you are getting close to it." She pointed to my purse, where I kept the sealed packet. "You still have it?" "Yes." "Keep it close," Nora said. "Diane is going to fight dirty now. She is scared, and a scared animal bites." The bite came later that night, but it didn't come from Diane. I was at home, organizing my files, preparing for the inevitable deposition. My phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the caller ID said Paul Foster. I stared at it. Paul never called me. In 30 years. I could count the number of phone calls from my father on one hand. I picked up. "Hello? Ella?" His voice was wrecked. It sounded thick, slurred, like he had been drinking for hours, or crying. "Ella, are you there?" "I am here. Paul." "I am sorry," he said. The words came out strangled. "About the party, about everything." "You let her do it," I said. I wasn't going to coddle him. "You sat there and watched." "I know," he whispered. "I am a coward. I have always been a coward." I heard the clink of glass against glass on his end. "She is going to destroy you in court, Ella," Paul said. "She is telling the lawyers lies about Maggie. She is telling them lies about you. I know. I am ready for her." "You don't understand," Paul said, his voice rising in a sudden jagged panic. "It isn't just about the house. It is about what the house hides." I went still. "What does that mean?" "Gavin," he breathed. The name landed in the silence like a stone dropped in a well. "Who is Gavin?" I asked. "Nora mentioned him, the uncle who died. What does he have to do with me?" "He didn't just die," Paul said, his voice trembling. "We erased him. We scrubbed him out, because of what he did and what he left behind." "Paul," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "What did he leave behind?" "There are things I never told you," Paul said, and I could hear him weeping now, a jagged, ugly sound. "About my brother, about Diane, about why we really took you in." "Tell me." "I can't," he sobbed. "She will kill me. She will destroy everything." "She is already destroying everything," I shouted. "Paul, wake up. There is nothing left to save. Just." He took a shuddering breath. "If you open that packet, if you open the second packet, just know that I loved him. I loved my brother, and I tried. I tried to do the right thing." "Paul, don't let her win," he whispered. "But God help you when you find out the truth." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tried to do the right thing. I looked at the safety deposit box key on my desk. I looked at the sealed packet that I had put back in the safe. The war had shifted. It wasn't about tax benefits anymore. It wasn't about a house. It wasn't about whether Diane Foster was a narcissist. It was about Gavin. I realized then that the house at Harrogate Lane wasn't a prize. It was a vault. It was a physical structure built to contain a secret so radioactive that my family had spent 30 years trying to bury it. And Diane wasn't fighting for the real estate. She was fighting to keep the vault door closed. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights blurred in my vision. Diane wanted a court battle. She wanted to file motions and claim I was a manipulator. She wanted to drag Maggie's name through the mud to save her own skin. Fine. I wasn't going to settle. I wasn't going to negotiate. I was going to let her drag me into court. I was going to let her put me on the stand. I was going to let her think she was winning. Let her think she had pinned me down with her high-priced lawyers and her lies. And then, when the stenographer was typing and the judge was watching and Diane was sitting there in her pearls thinking she was untouchable, I was going to open the packet. I wasn't going to use it to negotiate a settlement. I was going to use it to burn the whole thing down. "Okay, Paul," I whispered to the silence. "I won't let her win." I went to my safe. I took out the packet. I traced the wax seal one last time. Part 10 was coming, and I was going to be the one to write the ending. The key to 742 Harrogate Lane was heavy, a solid piece of brass that felt like it belonged to a prison warden rather than a granddaughter. I stood on the front porch, the wind whipping my hair across my face, staring at the black lacquered door. This house had been the backdrop of my entire life. It was where I learned to walk, where I learned to be quiet, and where I learned that love was conditional. Now, legally, it was mine. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent in a way that felt wrong. Usually, there was the sound of the housekeeper vacuuming, or Diane barking orders into a telephone, or the television in the den playing financial news. But today, the silence was total. It was the silence of a held breath. Diane was staying at a hotel in the city, hiding from the humiliation of the party. Paul was presumably at his club, drinking his lunch. I was alone with the ghosts. I walked up the main staircase, my hand trailing along the mahogany banister. I wasn't here to measure for curtains. I was here to excavate. I went straight to the 3rd floor. This had been Maggie's domain, even when her health was failing. She refused to move downstairs. She said she liked being closer to the sky. The air up here was stale, smelling of lavender sachets and old dust. I pushed open the door to her suite. It was exactly as she had left it. The bed was made with military precision. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I walked into her walk-in closet. It was a cavernous space filled with wool coats and silk scarves. In the back, tucked behind a row of winter boots, was a steamer trunk. It was blue, battered, and covered in stickers from places I had never been: Paris, Rome, Vienna. I knelt in front of it. It was locked. But I knew where Maggie hid her keys. She had shown me once, when I was 10, pretending it was a game. If you ever need to find the treasure. Ella, check the dancer's shoe. I reached for an old pair of ballroom dancing shoes on the shelf, inside the left toe. My fingers brushed cold metal. I unlocked the trunk. The lid creaked open, exhaling a scent of cedar and thyme. Inside, there were no clothes. It was filled with paper, stacks of letters tied with ribbon, photo albums with cracked leather spines, old calendars from the 1980s and 90s. I started digging. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. but I felt like an archaeologist brushing away dirt to find bone. I pulled out a photo album from 1992. That was the year I was born. I flipped the pages. There were photos of Paul, looking young and terrified. There were photos of Diane, looking glamorous and sharp. And then, there was a photo of a man I didn't recognize. He was standing next to Paul on a boat. He looked like Paul, but brighter. He had the same jawline, but his eyes were alive, mischievous. He was laughing, his head thrown back, a beer in his hand. On the back of the photo, written in Maggie's handwriting, was a single name, Gavin. I stared at the name. Gavin. I had never heard this name spoken in this house, not once. I pulled out a stack of letters. They were addressed to Maggie. I opened one, ideally. I shouldn't be reading private mail, but the statute of limitations on privacy had expired the moment Diane called me a tax write-off. Dear Mom, the letter read, I know you are angry. I know Paul thinks I am a disaster, but I am trying. I promise, I am trying to fix it. Just give me time. It was signed Gavin. I grabbed my phone and dialed Aunt Nora. She answered on the second ring. Who is Gavin? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear Nora exhale smoke. You found the trunk, she said. Who is he? Nora Paul mentioned him on the phone. He said, my brother. Why have I never heard of him? Because he was the mistake, Nora said, her voice hard. Paul was the golden child, the one who did what he was told. Gavin was wild. He was brilliant and charming and completely uncontrollable. He was Paul's older brother. What happened to him? He died, Nora said. 1995, a car accident, but he was dead to the family before that. Diane made sure of it. Diane hated him, Nora said. He saw through her. He used to make fun of her social climbing. He called her the Ice Queen. When he got into trouble with money, with girls Diane convinced your grandfather to cut him off. They erased him. Ella, it was easier to pretend he never existed than to explain him. What does he have to do with me? I asked, looking at the photo of the laughing man. Keep digging, Nora said. I can't tell you. You have to see it. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I went back to the trunk. I dug deeper, past the letters, to the bottom. There was a metal box. The kind you keep petty cash in. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside, there wasn't cash. There were receipts, medical receipts. I picked one up. It was a copy of a hospital bill from a private clinic in upstate New York. St. Jude's Home for Mothers. The date was April 20th, 1995. My birthday is April 25th. The bill was for prenatal care and delivery services. But the patient name wasn't Jane Doe. It wasn't a birth mother giving a child up for adoption. The patient name listed was Diane Foster. I frowned. That didn't make sense. Diane had always said I was adopted from an agency in Philadelphia. She said she never carried me. She said she couldn't have children. That was the whole point of the charity narrative. I dug further. I found a copy of a hospital bracelet. It was a photocopy, grainy and black and white. Baby girl Foster, Mother Foster, D. And then, a handwritten note on a piece of prescription pad paper. Patient is refusing lactation suppression, advising emotional distance, adoption protocol initiated internally. The signature at the bottom was scrawled, but I recognized the signature next to the consent to treat line on the attached form. It was Diane's signature, sharp, angular, aggressive. I sat back on my heels. The papers scattered around me like leaves. If Diane gave birth to me, why adopt me? Why create a fake paper trail? Why tell the world I was a charity case? The front door downstairs slammed shut. I jumped. I hadn't heard a car in the driveway. Hello? A voice called out. It was Paul. I shoved the papers back into the metal box and stood up. I walked out of the closet and to the top of the stairs. Paul was standing in the foyer. He looked disheveled. He was wearing a golf polo, but he looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He was holding a cardboard box. Ella, he looked up, startled to see me. I didn't know you were here. It is my house. Paul, I said, descending the stairs slowly. I don't need to announce my arrival. He flinched. Right. Of course. Diane wanted me to pick up some of her winter things. Her coats. Her coats are in the trunk, I said, along with the rest of her secrets. Paul went still. He put the cardboard box down on the marble floor. You found it, he whispered. I found Gavin, I said, reaching the bottom step. I found the hospital bill. From St. Jude's. Diane was the patient. Paul. She gave birth to me. Why lie? Why say I was adopted? Paul rubbed his face with his hands. He looked like a man trying to scrub away his own skin. It wasn't that simple, he said, his voice cracking. You don't understand the pressure we were under. Your grandfather, the reputation. Stop talking about reputation, I shouted, my voice echoing in the cavernous hall. Tell me the truth. Am I your daughter? Paul looked at me. His eyes were watery, red-rimmed. He looked at me with a mixture of love and absolute, crushing shame. No, he whispered. My breath hitched. But Diane, the hospital bill. Diane gave birth to you, Paul said. Yes, physically. She carried you, but it was complicated. We couldn't keep you, not as our child. It would have ruined everything. Why? I demanded. Why would having a child ruin everything? Because of who the father was. Paul said. He couldn't finish. He turned away, unable to look at me. Maggie begged us, Paul said to the wall. She begged us to keep you in the family. She said she wouldn't let her grandchild go to strangers. So Diane agreed, but only on her terms. She said we would adopt you. She said we would pretend you were a stranger so that no one would ask questions about the resemblance, so no one would do the math. The math? I asked. Just leave it alone, Ella, Paul pleaded. Take the house, take the money, but don't open the rest. Please. He picked up his box and walked out. He didn't take the coats. He just ran. I stood there in the foyer, my mind spinning. Diane was my mother, my biological mother, the woman who treated me like a tax write-off, like a burden, had actually carried me for 9 months. But Paul wasn't my father, and Diane had hated Gavin. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I pulled it out. It was a text message from a blocked number. No name, no ID. There was no text, just an image. I clicked on it. It was an old photograph, scanned and digitalized. It showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20. It was Diane. She was wearing a sundress, and she was visibly, undeniably pregnant. Her hand was resting on her stomach. Standing next to her, with his arm draped casually, possessively around her shoulders, was the man from the boat, Gavin. They were looking at each other, and the look on Diane's face wasn't hate. It was obsession. It was a hungry, desperate kind of love. My phone nearly slipped from my hand. The math. Paul had said so no one would do the math. Gavin was Paul's brother. If Diane was sleeping with Gavin and Diane gave birth to me, I felt the blood drain from my face. The room spun. Gavin wasn't just my uncle. I ran back upstairs. I ran to the guest room where I had left my purse. I pulled out the safety deposit box key. I pulled out the copy of the will. And I looked at the sealed packet that I had brought with me, the one I had taken from the safe this morning because I had a feeling I would need it. Open only when absolutely necessary. It wasn't just a detonator, it was a nuclear bomb. My phone rang again. This time, it was Barnes. Ella, he said, his voice tight. I just got a call from Diane's legal team. What do they want? I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. They are offering a settlement, a big one, $2 million, cash. Plus they dropped the contest on the house. They want you to sign a non-disclosure agreement and a waiver of all future claims. $2 million, I said. Yesterday they were calling me a fraud. Why the sudden generosity? They are panicked, Barnes said. They must know you're getting close to something. They want to buy your silence before you figure out what you are selling. They are too late, I said. Excuse me. I figured it out. Barnes, or at least I have the pieces. Ella, Take a breath. 2 million is a lot of money. If we go to court— No, I cut him off. No settlement, no NDA, no waiver. Are you sure this could get ugly? I looked at the photo on my phone. The photo of my mother and her brother-in-law. The photo that explained 30 years of hatred. Diane didn't hate me because I was an expense. She hated me because I was the living proof of the one thing she couldn't control. I was the ghost of the man she loved or the man she destroyed. Set the date, I said. Schedule the mediation, or the court hearing, whatever is next. Mediation is set for Friday, Barnes said. At the courthouse. Good, I said. Tell them I will be there. Ella, Barnes warned, if you turn this down, they will come at you with everything they have. Let them come, I said. I hung up. I looked at the sealed packet in my hand. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside anymore. I knew, but the world didn't know. Diane's society friends didn't know. The judge didn't know. Diane had spent 30 years rewriting history. She had turned her infidelity into charity. She had turned her daughter into a tax deduction. I walked over to the window and looked out at the sprawling lawn of the estate. My estate. Friday. Friday was the end of the story. I slipped the packet back into my bag. It felt lighter now. It didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like justice. The mediation room at the courthouse was designed to drain the emotion out of human conflict. It was a windowless box with beige walls, fluorescent lighting that hummed with a low-grade headache, and a long oval table made of fake mahogany. It was the kind of room where marriages went to die and corporations settled liability claims. Today, it was where Diane Foster thought she was going to buy my silence. I sat on one side of the table, flanked by Elliot Barnes. My hands were folded on top of a manila folder. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't sweating. After the discovery in the trunk, after seeing the photo of Diane and Gavin, the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, clinical clarity. Diane sat opposite me. She was wearing black, a modest, high-necked dress that suggested mourning, or perhaps martyrdom. She looked tired, but it was a curated exhaustion. Her makeup was flawless, applied to highlight her cheekbones and make her eyes look wide and sympathetic. Her lawyer, a man named Sterling who wore a watch worth more than my car, sat beside her, tapping a gold pen against a legal pad. Paul was there too. He sat in the corner, away from the table, staring at his shoes. He looked like a ghost haunting his own life. "Let's be reasonable," Sterling began, his voice smooth and patronizing. "Mrs. Foster is prepared to be generous. She understands that Ella is grieving. She understands that the confusion of the will has caused a rift. That is why we are offering $2 million to settle all claims to the Harrogate Lane estate. We simply want to avoid a protracted public battle that would tarnish Margaret Foster's memory." Diane nodded somberly. She reached for a tissue, dabbing at a dry eye. "I just want peace," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "I took Ella in when she had no one. I raised her as my own. It breaks my heart to see her so unstable, to see her lashing out because of greed." Margaret was confused at the end. "We all know that. I just want to protect the family legacy." She looked at me then, her eyes pleading, begging me to play the role she had written for me. "Take the money, Ella. Be the charity case one last time." I looked at Barnes. He gave me a microscopic nod. "Diane," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the lights. She blinked. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you want to keep lying on the record?" I asked. "Or should we stop pretending?" Sterling bristled. "Ms. Foster, if you are going to be hostile—" "I am not being hostile," I said. "I am being accurate." "We are contesting the will," Sterling threatened, leaning forward. "We have affidavits regarding Margaret's mental state. We will drag this out for years. Do you really want your grandmother's dementia paraded through the press?" "Margaret didn't have dementia," I said. "She had a conscience." I reached for the sealed packet, the final one, the one I had taken from the safe, the the one Maggie had labeled open only when absolutely necessary. The wax seal was already broken. I had opened it the night before, alone in my apartment, weeping until I had no tears left. But for them, for the record, I pulled the documents out slowly. "You said you took me in," I said to Diane. "You said I was a stranger. You said you adopted me for tax benefits." "It was a joke," Diane snapped, her mask slipping. "For God's sake, Ella, can you not take a joke?" "I found the receipts." "Diane," I said. I slid the first document across the table. It was the DNA test result Maggie had commissioned secretly when I was 12, matched against a sample from Gavin's old hairbrush she had kept. And next to it, a fresh confirmation I had rushed through a private lab using the sample I took from the trunk. "Reveal number 1, I said. "I am not a random orphan. My father was Gavin Foster, Paul's brother." Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Diane went rigid. She didn't look at the paper. She stared at me, her eyes widening. "That is speculation," Sterling said, but he sounded unsure. He looked at Diane. "Is this true?" "It doesn't matter," Diane hissed. "Gavin is dead. It doesn't change the adoption." "But the adoption was a lie too, wasn't it?" I asked. I slid the second document across, the copy of the hospital bill from St. Jude's Home for Mothers, the birth certificate Maggie had tracked down the original one, before it was sealed and amended. "Reveal number 2, I said, and I felt the words land like physical blows. "You didn't adopt me, Diane. You gave birth to me." Sterling stopped tapping his pen. He picked up the document, reading it rapidly. His face went pale. "You had an affair with your husband's brother," I said, my voice steady. "You got pregnant, and instead of owning it, instead of dealing with the scandal, you and Paul concocted a scheme. You went away for a sabbatical. You had me in secret, and then you pretended to adopt me, so you could explain why I looked like a foster without admitting I was one." Diane was shaking now. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard, her nails were digging into the wood. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I saved this family. I kept us together." "You erased my father," I said, "and you treated me like a financial transaction to cover your own guilt. You called me a tax write-off because it was the only way you could distance yourself from the fact that I was your daughter." I looked at her, really looked at her. "I am your daughter," I said, "and you hated me for it every single day." Diane put her face in her hands. A sound escaped her, a sob, or maybe a gasp of rage. "But that is just the family tragedy," I continued, relentless. "That isn't why we are here. We are here because of the money." I slid the final stack of papers across the table. "Reveal number 3, I said. These were copies of the tax returns Diane and Paul had filed for the years 1995 through 2000. Maggie had kept copies. She had highlighted the lines. "You claimed the federal adoption tax credit," I said. "You claimed benefits for adopting a special needs child, which is how you classified me on the paperwork to maximize the return. But you cannot claim an adoption credit for a child you are biologically related to. You cannot adopt your own daughter and ask the government to pay you for it." I pointed to the documents. "That is tax fraud. Diane, that is filing false instruments. That is perjury." Sterling dropped the papers. He looked at Diane with horror. He realized suddenly that he wasn't representing a grieving widow. He was representing a client who had walked him into a minefield. "If we go to court," I said, leaning back, "this all becomes public record. The affair, the secret birth, the tax fraud. The IRS doesn't care about your social standing. Diane, they care about their money." I pulled out one last piece of paper. It was a letter from Elliot Barnes, dated today. "Maggie had a contingency clause," I said. "She knew you would fight. She instructed the trustees that if you contested the will, if you tried to take the house, this evidence was to be turned over immediately to the district attorney and the IRS. I looked at Sterling. "The only reason this packet is on this table and not on a prosecutor's desk is because I haven't made the call yet. But I will." Diane looked up. Her face was ruined. The makeup was smeared, the composure shattered. She looked small. She looked like a woman who had built a castle out of glass and just realized she was holding a hammer. "Paul," she croaked. "Paul, help me." Paul stood up from his corner. He walked over to the table. He looked at the DNA test. He looked at the tax returns. He looked at me. "No," Paul said. Diane gasped. "What?" "I am done helping you hide," Paul said. His voice was quiet, but it was the first time in 30 years I had heard him sound like a man. "Sign the release, Diane." "But the house," she wailed. "Sign the release," Paul shouted, slamming his hand on the table, "or I will call the IRS myself." Diane flinched. She looked at Sterling. He closed his folder. "Mrs. Foster," Sterling said coldly, "I advise you to sign immediately." Diane picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She looked at me one last time. There was no love in her eyes. There was only fear. She signed the papers. She signed away the house. She signed away her right to contest. She signed away her control over me. She stood up, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. "I gave you life." She spat at me, a final, desperate attempt to hurt. "No," I said, gathering my papers. "You gave me a lie. Maggie gave me a life." Diane fled the room. This time, there was no clicking of heels. She just shuffled out, a defeated woman walking into a future where she was no longer the queen. Paul lingered for a moment. "He would have loved you," Paul said softly. "Gavin, he wanted you. That was the fight. He wanted to keep you. Diane wouldn't let him. Goodbye." "Paul," I said. He nodded. Accepting the boundary, he turned and walked out. I sat there in the silence of the mediation room. I took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like lemon pledge and anxiety anymore. It smelled like freedom. 6 months later, the renovation at 742 Harrogate Lane was complete. I hadn't changed everything. The bones of the house were beautiful, but I had stripped away the heavy drapes, the velvet ropes, the museum-quality stillness that Diane had imposed. I opened the windows. I let the light in. I was standing in what used to be the formal dining room, the room where the party happened, the room where I had been a write-off. It was different now. The long table was gone. In its place were easels, drafting tables, and canvases. The house wasn't just my home. I had turned the entire East Wing, Diane's precious, curated wing, into a residency for young artists. Specifically, for artists aging out of the foster care system. Kids who had been told they were burdens. Kids who had been treated like paperwork. We called it the Gavin and Maggie Foster Foundation. I walked through the studio, listening to the sounds of life. A girl was playing a cello in the corner. 2 teenagers were arguing passionately about acrylics versus oils. It was messy. It was loud. It was real. I walked up the stairs to the 3rd floor. Maggie's room. It was my office now. I sat at her desk, looking out the window as the sun began to set over the main line. The sky was a bruised purple and gold. I lit a single candle on the windowsill. It was a ritual I had started. 1 candle for the truth. I thought about Diane. She was living in a condo in Florida now, isolated, her social circle having evaporated the moment the rumors of fraud started whispering through the grapevine. Paul was in therapy, trying to untangle 60 years of passivity. We didn't talk. I didn't need to. I touched the surface of the desk. I thought about the little girl who used to hide in this house, afraid to make a sound, afraid that if she was too loud, she would be returned. I wasn't that girl anymore. I had the receipts. I had the truth. And more importantly, I had the knowledge that my existence wasn't a tax strategy. It was a survival story. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. The woman staring back was strong. She was whole. "I don't need permission to belong," I whispered to the empty room, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. "Not from my mother. Not from anyone. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to relive, but putting it out there feels like the final step in taking back my narrative. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country, and let's show each other that no matter where we are never really alone in these battles. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more truth-telling, please subscribe to the Kate Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can get this story out to anyone who needs to hear it. Stay strong, and remember you are never just a write-off.